reflective surfaces. So things to keep in mind. Right? The more reflective the surface is, the more concentrated the shadows and highlights will be. If you've ever seen like glass, you've ever seen like, of course you have, right? But if you aim like a flashlight at it, it'll get that really, really bright reflected highlight back off. And the inverse of that is that you'll also get very, very harsh edges. So let's say that we have a surface that's like this, right? And I just draw like a really simple shadow on it. And let's say that there's like a slight bit of bounce light on this side. And like maybe a little bit of a highlight on this side. So this is a slightly more matte surface, right? This surface is a little bit less shiny. All right, you might not even add this highlight in. You could even just, actually, I'm gonna get rid of it. We could actually just draw it like this, all right? And you're like, oh, this is a more matte surface. I've only added the shadows in, right? But the second that I do this kind of magic, and now there's gonna be like a really bright kind of reflection, like some bounce light off to this side. More of this shadow, and then a really bright kind of reflection spot. Wow, it suddenly looks shinier. Yeah, we have a matte surface right here, and then suddenly we have a shiny surface, right? Because we have more concentrated highlights. It's a concentrated highlight, a defined shadow, and a stronger bounce light. They will be very concentrated in all styles. Every single style, when they want to determine that something is shiny, will have really concentrated highlights, really concentrated bounce light, and really concentrated shadows. Right, this will be visible in all styles, but how detailed you make it is determined by your style. So something more simple, a simpler style would probably have something like this. Something more intense, you see a glass bottle, you're gonna paint it like a glass bottle. Let me show you an example. So the left is the original, the right is my painting. So adding in all of these extra shapes, adding in all of these extra textures, right? This is a more realistic way of approaching it. A lot of high contrast, a lot of sharp kind of edges, that sort of thing is really, really important, right? If I was to do this in a more simple way, like I would just have the bottle here. I'm doing it quickly, so I'm not gonna like spend too long on it, but I might have like a shadow or two here. And this also gets the job done, right? You can tell that it's still a really, really shiny surface. It's just super simple now, right? So not all reflective surfaces reflect color. Observe the surface to check if they do. There isn't really a specific rule for this. It's more like sometimes I see people who draw reflections and they're like, oh, it's reflecting this, so it has to reflect color. Or they draw a surface and it doesn't reflect color when it probably should. Think of like glazed pottery. Wow, this image is crunchy. But you notice how it reflects? There's no real reflections that have color in them, right? You might see the same thing with glass, right? You have that raw, right, strong, concentrated shine here. You have some harsher edges off here. There's some bounce light that's really harsh, right? But it's all like one kind of color, right? It's a very, very sharp, like reflective shadow, reflective light kind of thing, but it's not in color. On the contrary, if we have something like chrome, a chrome car, right? Look at how much color is being reflected in there. It is reflecting, it's like a mirror. The more mirrored it is, the more color will reflect onto it. But if it's a little bit less mirrored, if it's just shiny, more often than not, it won't. Some color, some like glass will reflect color though, so that's not necessarily true. It just depends on the material itself. So you see that with a normal chrome car, that's very reflective in that way. But if we look at this car, that's gold chrome, it actually doesn't really have much color reflected in it. It's much less, right? You can still see some color, but because of that gold, it's kind of removing that color from it. So it really depends on the material, and this is where I'm just gonna say look at references.
If you'd like to support the channel and the creation of free arts education, become a member on Patreon for working files, behind-the-scenes posts, and discounts on our class offerings.
Right, so transparent and semi-transparent surfaces that aren't flat will distort what's behind it. I see this a lot with people in general, is where they have like a cup in front of something, and a cup is a cylinder, but they just have everything go straight through the cup and they don't distort what's behind it at all. Again, I'm going to show you this in a very kind of simple way. I don't want to do anything like super painted, but let's say that we have like a kind of pink background. So let's say that we've got like a cup, we've got a glass cup. So there's no distortion applied to this one, right? Can you do this? Technically, yes, if you really want to, but I think it doesn't look right. Even if you're more cartoony, right? Like people always ask this, like, how do you know how it's going to distort? It's going to distort in the direction of the form. This is a cylinder. It's going to distort with those curves. So if I draw that same cup again, the background is not going to look like this. First of all, there might even be some like you're most likely going to see your shadows and your highlights kind of following the shape of whatever it is too. This isn't perfect. I'm not using a reference, so we're just going off of what my brain is thinking. If you don't have the reference directly in front of you, right, it tends to just be fine if you just kind of guesstimate. methinks. But a good rule of thumb is just like, if you don't know how it distorts, it'll most likely distort with the shape of the thing itself.
Windows don't distort anything because they're flat, but even something like glasses will because it's a convex surface.
Good rule of thumb is that the distortion will follow the shape of the form. Number 4, I'm not even gonna elaborate. Number 4, use reference. Can't figure it out? Look up a reference.
Join a virtual class to learn live from our professional artists. Get creative assignments, individual guidance, and real-time feedback on your artwork. Start today and level up your practice. If you learned something new, like and share this with a fellow art nerd. If you love receiving quality and free arts education, subscribe. Here's a couple other videos you can check out next.